Okay, I'm going to try to make this a short video, but I am not promising anything because this is a really huge topic today. They have whole chapters dedicated to this one section in trigonometry. So I am trying to cover it thoroughly with everything that you'll need to know, but trying not to get too technical to really bother you. Now, your book doesn't think that you have a calculator like you have because your book is an older book, and not everybody had those kind of calculators back when we were in school. So, your book might send you to a trig table in the back to find out some information, and we'll talk about that in a second too. However, when you do it, I expect you to use your calculator to find out the answers. Okay, so let's start off with some of the very basics. So trigonometric ratios are ratios that work with any triangle. That's why they're called trigonometric. It means triangle. So it's a triangle measure. So we're talking about ratios. So we're going to talk about ratios of different sides. And yes, the word ratio does refer to a fraction. Sorry about that one. It's not my fault. But when we're talking about sine, and that's how it's pronounced, sine x, when we're talking about that, x is our degree. So x refers to our angle that we're talking about. So over here, my angle x is what I'm talking about. X has a degree to it because it's an angle, but when I refer to the sine of x, then I'm saying the opposite side from that angle over the hypotenuse in the triangle is equal to our sine x. Now, if I wanted to abbreviate sine, your calculator and everybody else in the world does that by saying SIN, just the first three letters. So sine x is going to be equal to the opposite side from this, which is 7, over the hypotenuse of the triangle, which is 25. So our sine x is going to equal 7 over 25, which, yes, is a fraction. And yes, your calculator doesn't see it as a fraction. It sees it as a decimal. We'll get to that in a minute. Okay. Now, back over here. If I'm talking about cosine, because that's how we say it, this is the angle still, and this is the ratio that it has to equal. Now, everybody sees this, and they want to call that sin and that cos and this tan. No, don't do that. That is not the appropriate way. It is not what mathematicians do, and it's not what you're going to do because we're going to make you smarter. So, always call that sine, always call that cosine, always call that tangent. I know it's an abbreviation. We're letting you get away by writing an abbreviation instead of writing it all the way out, but when you talk about it, you need to talk about it. Whole word. So cosine of x, if this is my x, is going to be the adjacent side, that's 24 because it's the one beside the x, over the hypotenuse. Now there are some students that I've had that have said, well, 25 is adjacent to it too. That's true, 25 is, but more importantly, 25 is the hypotenuse. So when we talk about an adjacent side, we mean one that is not the hypotenuse. So our adjacent side must be 24, and our hypotenuse is 25. So the cosine of x is 24 over 25. And then the tangent of x, once again, x is our angle, is talking about the opposite side over the adjacent side. So my opposite side is 7, and my adjacent side is 24. So it's going to be 7 over 24. Now, you can look at a triangle and you can get those. That's about a third of the battle for today. Another thing you have to be able to do is to look at the triangle with the information given and figure out what x is. This is when you need a calculator. So, on your specific calculator, the pink one, the one I bought you, yeah, that calculator. On your specific, if your eyes look, it might be a different color. We haven't bought yours yet when I filmed this, so just bear with me. Your specific calculator has sine, cosine, and tangent as buttons. And then on top of that, it has sine inverse with a little -1 up top. That's called sine inverse because that's what it literally says. And then the next one says cosine inverse, and the next one says tangent inverse. And we might not have talked about this in the past, but the way you get to those things is by pressing the shift button. That's why they're up top. You have to tell your calculator you want to shift up top of that button. So when you press shift, then it'll automatically take whatever's on top of the button that you press instead of what's actually on the button that you press. So there's that little piece. Now, any book worth its weight is not going to call them sine inverse, cosine inverse, and tangent inverse. They're just not, because that's not what they were called back in the day. Back in the day, they were called arc cosine, arc tangent, and arc sine. Arc, A-R-C, arc, meaning how we do the opposite stuff. So normally we know what our angle is. Here they just said x, but normally we know what our angle is and we'll get the ratio. But sometimes you want to figure out what the angle is. So I have 3 different ratios here I can use to figure out what the angle is, but you're going to have your calculator with you. So the way to do it on your calculator, if you want to know what the angle is, you have to use arc sine with the ratio for sine. If you want to know what it is with cosine, you'd have to use arc cosine or cosine inverse with the ratio for cosine. So for example, if we were doing this problem and we wanted to know what x was and we were going to use sine to figure it out, we would punch into the calculator the shift key. I think it goes in this order. I could be wrong. I'll tell you how to reverse the order if you need to. So you'll punch the shift key and then you'll punch the sine key, because on top of it you're getting to the sine inverse part. And then you will punch in excuse me, parentheses 7 divided by 25. I guess these are all little. Now, it's possible that your calculator wants you to figure that out first and then do shift sine inverse. I'm not sure because I'm not there, so I can't tell you which one it is, but I can tell you what the answer will be. So, using my phone to get it, calculator, turn to the side to get to the sine stuff, and then press it so I can get to the sine inverse stuff. We got 7 over 24, so I want sine inverse, and my calculator says A sine for arc sine. If you don't know that that's what it is, then you wouldn't know what in the world is the A for. It stands for arc. So arc sine of 7 divided by 25, close my parentheses. So see, that's what it says. I don't know if you can see it or not. There it is. So, and then I press enter, and it gives me that 16. So that means that this degree here is actually 16.26. So 16.26 degrees is what we got. Now, here's the thing. Sometimes they're going to give you the information that you need for the one that they want you to use. So here we had all 3. We could have used any 3 of these. In fact, we're going to do another one. Let's do the tangent one. So you would do the shift, and then you would do tangent, which will give you your tangent inverse, and then you would do your 7 divided by 24. And when you punch that in your calculator, hold on a second. Seven divided by 24, close parentheses, equals, hey, look, it is the exact same number. And it's the exact same number because we're talking about the exact same angle. It's just another way of finding that angle. It's 16.26. So it depends on what information they give you in the triangle as to which one of these arc sines, arc cosine, arc tangent you're going to have to use. So if instead of giving me all three numbers, if they would have just given me those two numbers, then I know I would have had to have used sine because that's the one that's got the opposite and the hypotenuse. Or if they would have just given me these two numbers, then I know I would have had to have used tangent because that's the one that's got the opposite over adjacent. Or if they would have just given me these two numbers, then I would have had to have used cosine because that's the one that's got adjacent over hypotenuse. So sometimes you're going to have to look at your triangle to try to figure out which one of those you're going to use and then use it. Now, that's the second part of this section. The third part of this section is this. Sometimes they tell you the angle and they don't tell you the sides. Or they give you one side and want you to find the other sides. So let's talk about different numbers. In fact, let's talk about more familiar numbers. Or hopefully more familiar numbers. Let's say they told me, instead of calling this X, they told me it was 30 degrees. Look familiar? And let's say they called this side 8.66. That's not really helpful for you because that's not a square root of 3. If it had been a square root of 3, or if they'd given us this side, we could find the other two sides, no problem. But right now, this is not a square root of 3, so that's not helpful. Unhelpful. But some things that we do know is we can punch into our calculator the sine of 30, cosine of 30, or tangent of 30. Because that's where my angle goes, and we knew what the angle was. And they want us to find out what the other sides are. So I'm going to call this A, B, and C for lack of better numbers right now. So for sine of 30, which sides is that really talking about? Well, sine is opposite over hypotenuse, so that's going to be like A over C. That's not going to help me right now because I don't know what A and C are. We'll move on. For cosine of 30, that's going to be this side over that side, so that's going to be 8.66 over C. That could be helpful. At least we got another number in there. Could be helpful. For tangent of 30, that's going to be A over 8.66. That could be helpful too. So now that I've written down what some of the possibilities are, I see that in order for me to find A and C, I'm probably going to want to deal with these two. Now, I'm not looking for an angle. So I'm not going to use this stuff down here. All that arc sine, arc cosine, arc tangent stuff, that's when you're looking for an angle. Now we're talking about the ratios. So your calculator can just pop out what the ratio is because the ratios are always the same for that particular angle. Just like whenever we go to another 30, 60, 90 triangle, we get the same ratio because it always reduces down to the same numbers. So we know what it's going to reduce down to, but just in case you don't remember, or in case you just rather use your calculator to get stuff, that's fine. Let me show you how to do it. So if we want to use this one, cosine 30, take your handy dandy calculator and you punch into it cosine, just the regular old button, and then 30, and press equal. It's going to pop out a number. Don't be afraid. It's all right. I'm getting there. Give me a second. This is why I need to get me a regular calculator instead of using my phone all the time. Just saying. Okay, cosine 30. I press enter. It gave me that right there. So that's going to equal 0.8660025, blah, 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 blah. Or I'll write one more out there. Anyway, hey, look, it all fit on. That's pretty special. I'm just saying, that is amazing that it all fit. So that tells me something, but it doesn't tell me this. I needed to find this. But I do know, since I know what cosine of 30 is, I can replace it with that side. So I can say that 0.8660254 has to equal my 8.66 over C. That didn't look like a C. Then you get to cross multiply, and you get that 0.8660254. C is equal to 8.66. And then you can divide both sides by this thing. And you get that C is equal to, I'm sorry, I want 8.66 divided by that last number equals, oh look, 9.9997, which I'm going to go ahead and round up to 10. So C is equal to 10. I can come over here, I can put my 10 in. Now, if you were quick and you knew, you could just tell me what A was. But let's say you can't. Let's say you want to do it by trigonometric ratios, you want to save yourself some time. You can go in here, turn it over, get rid of that number, and press 10 of 30. And it's going to give you the 0.57735 is equal to A over 8.66. I just replaced tangent of 30 with what it told me tangent of 30 was. Then I get to do my cross multiplying, so I'll multiply that by my 8.66. And that gives me 4.9998, which I'm saying is going to be 5, equals A. Which I was pretty sure it was going to be anyway, because we know that this is 1 and that is 2, so that divided by 2 has to tell me what that is. So this must be 1, which means 8.66 is roughly 5 square roots of 3. Not that you asked, but that's what it is. I just rounded it off a little bit. Now your book will sit there and try to tell you that you're going to have to do this using the trig table in the back on page 658. If you want to look at page 658 really quickly, I can tell you how to use a trig table. 658. You see it says trigonometric ratios up at the top. The first column has the angle, so that's the degree of the angle. The second column has sine for that angle, cosine for that angle, and then tangent for that angle. And it gives angles all the way up to 90 degrees because you can't have an angle more than 90 degrees that you're talking about because this is 90 degrees. Now, we could have done it with this angle up here if we'd wanted to. It would have been a 60-degree angle. And that gives you, I mean, you can use the same size. It's just a different angle, but it's going to give you the same answers. You're going to get yielded the same information. So it doesn't matter which one you use, but your number's always going to be less than 90, so you don't need to worry about that part. So if we had wanted to know the sine of 30, we'd go to 30 for our angle, and then over to the side, you see that sine is 0.5, which is right because it's 1/2. And then you'd see that cosine is 0.660, which is what we found when we punched it in our calculator. And then you see that tangent is 0.5774, which is what we found when we punched it in our calculator. See, our calculator gives us a more exact number than the trig table does. That's why we should use our calculator. Just saying. Now, they say that in order for you to figure out what the degree is, which is what we were doing before when we had 7/24 and we were looking for our degree. So back when we had that our sine was equal to 7/25, you could take 7 divided by 25, find out what that decimal is. 7 divided by 25, you get 0.28. You take that and you look for a 0.28 for sine. So I go down my sine column until I get to around a 0.28, which falls in between 16 degrees and 17 degrees, almost exactly in between, which is how we got our 16 point whatever it was, because that's in between 16 degrees and 17 degrees. Once again, your calculator is going to give you a much better answer than what a trig table does. Back in the day, and I do mean way back in the day, all they had were trig tables, and it was a lot harder, I promise you. There's interpolation they had to do on it, and nobody wants to do that, ever. So, be happy you have a calculator. Be happy your calculator can do trigonometric ratios. I looked out for you, just saying. You might want to take now to remind your mother that it's coming up that you're going to need a much nicer calculator in the future. And you'd like to get it so that you could take the calculator you have and pass it down to Isaac because he's going to need it for algebra. So I would suggest you put that little bug in her ear and let her know that your new calculator probably should be around the $120 mark, so that she can make sure she sets money aside for that kind of thing. So yeah, that should take care of that. Now, one more thing before I go. I know this was the last section, and I still have to tell you what the homework was. Oh my God. I get back to it. Classwork and homework for this section. In the meantime, one more thing before I go. I know I've done a lot of one more things. You'll be all right, I promise. Okay, you spent some time over the break catching up on videos that my mom did. And I need you to let me know what you've done. So in order to do that, that's the classwork and homework for this section. In order to do that, in order to tell me what it is that you've done so that I don't worry about whether or not you're going to be ready when we get there, I'm making it extra credit for your test. So what I need for you to do is to take a regular sheet of paper. out of your mom's little printer or whatever, just a regular piece of paper, nothing special. And I need for you to construct for me a square. Once you have constructed the square, on two adjacent sides of the square, I want you to create a semicircle on each side. Make sure they're adjacent sides. Make sure the radius of the semicircle is half of that side. So you're going to have to bisect that side and then make that your radius and draw your semicircle. Once you've done that, I want you to look at the figure you have, and I want you to very lightly color it accordingly, and then I want you to have your mother mail it to me. Do not do this on a fancy paper. Do this on a regular sheet of paper. This would be the extra credit that is going to be attached to your test for Chapter 8. It will be a total of, and make sure I can see all the little marks you do, because that's how I'm grading it. It's not by looking at the final result. I need to be able to see all the little marks. That's why you're coloring it very, very lightly. The appropriate color. You'll be able to figure out what the appropriate color is once you've done it correctly. So you might have to listen to what I just said more than once to make sure you've done it correctly. Now, make sure your mom sends it to me in the mail, and I will look at it and I will grade it. And as soon as I'm done grading it, I will end up probably writing on it what the grade is and then faxing the picture of it back to you. I mean, not faxing, but scanning it and emailing it back to you with the test when I scan your test and the results from it. So one more time, done in your spare time, not part of your math homework, done in your spare time. Make sure you construct a square, and on two adjacent sides of the square, construct a semicircle that has a radius equal to half of that side of the square. That's your work. And once you've done that, make sure you color it very lightly so I can still see all the little marks you made on it to find the bisector of the side and to construct the square, and I need to be able to see all the stuff. Don't cut it out, just color it very lightly, the appropriate color, so I can be sure to see all the little marks on it. Okay. The review and test will be the next 2 days. Bye.